the fight over here has been won. The House has voted 40 times to defund, change Obamacare, to repeal it. It's time for the Senate to have this fight.
Now on Newsmax Exclusive, Republicans draw a line in the sand over Obamacare amidst a looming budget showdown and the threat of a government shutdown. Senator Marco Rubio, Grover Norquist, and Donald Trump weigh in.
Then 13 people killed during one of Washington, D.C.'s deadliest days. Representative Louis Gohmert says it's time for the U.S. to act.
Plus, as negotiations continue about the fate of Syria's chemical weapons, a former Navy SEAL who lost friends in Benghazi says the U.S. has lost its path on foreign policy.
I'm David Nelson from Money News here in New York. I'll be talking about my interview this week with Michael Gayed and why he thinks Larry Summers' exit from consideration as the next Fed chairman is so important.
And is your food causing you pain in places other than your stomach? In a Newsmax health report, one doctor says it's possible. His prescription for pain-free living coming up. Newsmax Exclusive starts now. Hello and welcome to Newsmax Exclusive. I'm John Bachman.
And I'm Kathleen Walter. Thanks for joining us.
President Obama bracing for a budget showdown with Republicans.
This after House Speaker John Boehner, caving to pressure from his own party, announced the GOP would try to withhold funding from the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Speaker Boehner saying Wednesday that the House will indeed use a debt limit measure to push for a delay on Obamacare.
We're going to continue to do everything we can to repeal the president's failed health care law. This week, the House will pass a CR that locks the sequester savings in and defunds Obamacare.
At a press conference this week, Speaker Boehner says he hopes to pass a bill that extends government funding for 3 months, but defunds the president's health care law. The Senate is then expected to omit the language on health care and send it back to the House.
There should be no conversation about shutting the government down. That's not the goal here. Our goal here is to cut spending and to protect the American people from Obamacare. It's as simple as that. There's no interest on our part in shutting the government down.
In an interview on ABC earlier this week, the president blamed the GOP for a stalemate on the budget. He suggested that no such legislation would make it past his desk.
What I've said is, with respect to the budget, we've presented our budget. And now it's the job of Congress to come up with a budget that keeps our long-term trends down or our current trends of reducing the deficit moving forward, but also allows us to invest in the things that we need to grow.
If a deal isn't reached, the government will run out of money in a matter of days.
There are ways of doing this. It's just that they haven't been willing to negotiate in a serious way on that. What I haven't been willing to negotiate, and I will not negotiate, is on the debt ceiling.
So what happens next? Well, here's the bottom line. If the House doesn't act, the government will run out of money on October 1st. Senate Democrats would surely vote down the House measure. The debt ceiling measure is expected to come to the House floor next week.
Senators Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio all praised House Republicans for proposing a spending bill that funds the federal government and prevents a government shutdown, but also, and this is most important here, permanently defunds Obamacare. In an exclusive interview with Newsmax TV earlier, Senator Rubio says Republicans should do anything and everything to prevent Obamacare from becoming law, its full implementation, and that it can be done without shutting down the government. And this, by any means necessary approach the GOP is taking, is gaining momentum.
Every single member of the Republican conference agrees that Obamacare should be stopped. I think the disagreement is about the tactics. I just personally believe, without criticizing anyone else, I just personally believe that this is an issue that's so damaging, Obamacare is so damaging to the fundamental American promise that if you work hard and you sacrifice, you should have the opportunity to achieve a better life. I think Obamacare is so damaging to that principle that we should be willing to do anything we can to stop it from moving forward. Now, I'm not in favor of shutting down the government. I think the president appears now politically to be in favor of shutting down the government. I'm in favor of funding the government at the levels that were agreed to last year in the Budget Control Act, and of not spending a single penny more of hard-working taxpayer dollars on a disaster, which is Obamacare. A disaster, not that I'm saying it's a disaster the administration has admitted is a disaster because they've had to delay major portions of it. A disaster that labor unions that strongly supported Obamacare, and they're now asking to be exempted from it. So I think that we should do everything and anything we can to prevent this law from going into effect, because once it starts to hurt people, it's going to hurt our economy in ways that may be very difficult to undo later.
And the Syria chemical weapons negotiations may have an impact on the budget negotiations as well. That's according to anti-tax hero Grover Norquist. During a Newsmax exclusive interview this week, Norquist said President Barack Obama is being led around by the nose by Russian President Vladimir Putin, thus weakening his authority here at home and his hand in this high-stakes poker match looming with government funding.
There are three things at play here. It's like juggling. You've got the continuing resolution. So it says, okay, Congress, you can keep spending, but just at the same level you've been spending. No increases at all going for another 3 months. That's a good thing to do because it keeps the caps on spending and it doesn't allow spending to creep up. 2, debt ceiling bill. That's one where Leader Boehner in the House has told the president in the past, you want $1 trillion debt ceiling, you got to cut spending $1 trillion. So now we're going to have an argument on debt ceiling about, you want debt ceiling? What is it that the country gets from you as proof that we're going to actually try and reduce the damage you've done on spending? We got a $2.5 trillion spending cut in 2011, and that's what the caps and sequester are. The most important thing to keep in mind is we have to keep the sequester limits on spending. Be very careful. Some people want us to overreach and get into fisticuffs with the administration or the Senate. The Democrats have the Senate, the Democrats have the White House, Republicans have the House. There are 3 players here. Only one of them has any interest in limiting spending. 2 of them want to break the sequester caps and raise taxes. So while we fight to delay and defund some or all of Obamacare, we need to not fall down and fall backwards and end up losing the sequester.
The president of the influential Club for Growth tells us his organization's group will hold Republicans' feet to the fire when it comes to stopping Obamacare. He says the GOP should stop funding the legislation, even if it means risking a government shutdown.
Every single member of the Republicans in Congress, House and Senate, all ran on defunding or repealing Obamacare or both, and the American people, over 50%, have never supported Obamacare. The unions have come out against Obamacare. The president said it's not time to implement it. The IRS has created an atmosphere where no one trusts them to enforce it. So, it seems like a logical thing to do. Let's defund it. Let's stop it, because nobody really wants it.
Chris Chicola says that past government shutdowns have actually had favorable results.
Well, I guess the only example they can point to is when the Republicans shut down the government in '95. So the '96 election, what happened? They maintained control of the House. They picked up seats in the Senate. They got welfare reform, and they got a balanced budget. So it doesn't sound all that risky to me.
Real estate mogul, reality TV star, and GOP party backer Donald Trump is giving the GOP plan to defund Obamacare his approval. In a Newsmax exclusive, I asked him if he thinks the GOP should go for broke.
I do. I think they have to, because ultimately it's going to destroy the country anyway. They're saying you're going to shut down government. Well, Obamacare is going to shut down government in a much worse way. So it's just not affordable, and it's not good insurance. It's not good for people that need it. So we should come up with a plan for great health care, better than Obamacare provides, but we can't use Obamacare. It's a disaster. I have many people that are very good friends of mine that are closing businesses. I know so many people that are either closing or they're hiring part-timers, or they're telling people that have been with them for 20 years that, listen, you're going to have to go part-time. It's terrible what's happening. So Obamacare is, in a way, it's closing up and shutting down government, because ultimately it's going to lead to a shutdown of government. So what's the difference of doing it now or doing later? I think you're better off doing it now. Whether it's defunding or just terminating in some form, the Republicans have a lot of strong cards, much stronger than people are saying, and much stronger than a lot of the Republicans themselves are saying. And this is a good opportunity to do something that really would be good for the country.
The rampage at Washington's Navy Yard this week reignited the nation's gun control debate. The Navy Yard has now returned to mostly normal operations. The FBI is still on site investigating Building 197, where the massacre happened. And there continues to be questions about how Alexis was able to get a gun in the first place. Sources say he left behind 2 short cryptic phrases etched on the side of his shotgun used in the rampage. but the investigators do not know exactly what those etchings mean. Aaron Alexis also recently complained to police that stalkers were using a microwave-type machine to send vibrations into his body. Newport, Rhode Island police took a report and forwarded it on to local Navy officials. It apparently was never passed up the chain of command. Alexis's mother is also speaking out for the first time. She says she doesn't know why her son would do this.
Aaron is now in a place where he can no longer do harm to anyone, and for that I am glad. To the families of the victims, I am so very sorry that this has happened. My heart is broken.
Even so, Majority Leader Harry Reid said from the Senate floor this week that prospects for new gun control legislation have not improved even after this most recent mass shooting, which left 12 victims and the gunman dead.
We're going to move this up as quickly as we can, but we've got to have the votes first. We don't have the votes. I hope to get them, but we don't have them now.
And during an exclusive interview with Newsmax TV, Texas Representative Louis Gohmert says the nation needs to have a serious conversation about mental health issues and possibly overhauling the entire mental health system.
But it is important to note that it is our own system that's breaking down. How in the world you give a legitimate ID to a guy who got ousted out of the Navy for gunfire incidents? I mean, good night. How do you give this guy access to anything?
And of course, with many people questioning how Alexis, with his history of problems, was able to carry a weapon onto a military base and get one in his hands in the first place, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel has ordered a review of military security and employee screening programs at all U.S. military bases. And coming up next on Newsmax Exclusive, is the U.S.-Russian deal on Syria's chemical weapons the right move? Former ambassador to the UN John Bolton explains why he feels the deal will die a death of 1,000 cuts.
And we're all tired of paying more at the pump, but what one expert says you might be paying down the road will shock you.
And if the aches and pains of senior living are getting you down, don't let them get you down. One doctor says you can make them go away without prescription drugs. Those stories coming up next. Even though Russia and the U.S. reached a deal to get Syria to give up their chemical weapons, officials from both nations are squabbling over the smallest details.
And can diplomacy really work here, or is this agreement destined to fail? As the Assad regime ramps up its attacks on the opposition, we posed that question this week to the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, who described the president's diplomatic dilemma as a debacle.
Well, I think the agreement will die a death of 1,000 cuts. I don't think we'll see Syria flat out repudiated, but I think by drawing out the implementation, by taking half measures, by not being completely transparent about their chemical weapons program, by using the ongoing fighting in Syria to slow down the work of the UN weapons inspectors, and on and on and on, the Syrians will use this agreement in Geneva to buy time. And I think that was always Russia's objective. I don't think anybody seriously thought Congress was going to authorize the use of military force against Assad. Anybody could see the direction things were moving in Congress. And I think Russia was able to seize on what was soon to be a real political disaster for President Obama to put this agreement in place that I think will strengthen the Assad regime and certainly not result in the destruction of all or maybe even the bulk of Syria's chemical weapons.
And Ambassador Bolton went on to say he believes the Obama administration is at a loss for a plan B if this deal falls through. He says the ad hoc policy will have negative implications not only in the Mideast, but also worldwide. Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, shares the ambassador's concerns, underscoring in a Newsmax exclusive that the U.S. should stay out of the crisis in Syria.
You know, I don't know that there is any kind of fair request to come from, a guy who just gassed his people. But my hope is that some kind of diplomatic solution can come of this. But I think the back and forth publicly of, Putin poking his finger in our face and, writing editorials instructing the U.S., that kind of stuff publicly probably doesn't further the diplomatic process, nor does trying to make the negotiations in public of saying what exactly you accept and not accept. But my hope is, though, that there is a way that the chemical weapons store could become under international control, and I think that would be a huge step in the right direction.
And polls show Americans are overwhelmingly against U.S. military action in Syria, and some observers maintain that Senator Paul and others are pushing America toward a new age of isolationism. The senator says he takes issue with that, saying he considers himself a foreign policy realist.
Now to Benghazi. This week, lawmakers question Under Secretary of State Patrick Kennedy concerning the September 11th attack on U.S. diplomatic posts in Libya last year. That attack killed Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 others. Kennedy, who is in charge of staffing at the State Department, told Congress that 4 people were removed from their senior leadership positions as a result of a review board's findings. But some lawmakers say that even though the investigation found, quote, failures in leadership at senior levels, the punishment for those senior officials has not been sufficient.
Bottom line is that over 1 year later, no State Department personnel have been held accountable for the department's failure to protect the Benghazi consulate and the U.S. personnel there. Not one.
But Kennedy shot back and rejected Congressman Ed Royce's claim.
I submit respectfully, Mr. Chairman, that accountability includes being relieved from your job and assigned to other positions. To me, that is serious accountability.
So what do family members and friends of those 4 Americans think about where things stand now with the Benghazi investigation? It's also important to remember that the U.S. Justice Department has indicted suspects, including an Islamist militant named Ahmed Khattala, for murder. According to the New York Times, intelligence officials know where he is and where the other suspects from the Benghazi attack are hiding. And still not one of those attackers has been brought to justice. So during this Newsmax exclusive, we asked former Navy SEAL Brandon Webb, whose best friend Glenn Doherty was one of the 4 killed in the Benghazi attack, what is more important to him, catching those militants or fixing the problems at the State Department?
It may come or sound surprising, but I personally would rather see us clean up our own house, because the problem is it's business. It's back to business as usual in the State Department, and it puts further American lives at risk. And so let's clean up the problems at state.
Webb also claims that the State Department has actively blocked parts of the FBI's investigation, and also this week, House Oversight Committee Chairman Darrell Issa told reporters that he can call back former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to testify before Congress if he thinks he needs to. And coming up next on your Newsmax exclusive, Money News contributor David Nelson joins us from New York.
Hello, I'm David Nelson from Money News here in New York. Coming up next, I'm going to talk about my interview this week with Michael Gayed. He says Larry Summers' exit from consideration as the next Fed chairman could make markets go a lot higher.
Plus, is it even possible to live pain-free over 50? Well, don't let those aches and pains get you down. Next, Dr. Teitelbaum explains why both the problem and solution rest in your refrigerator. That's next.
And welcome back. Federal Reserve Vice Chair Janet Yellen this week became the frontrunner to replace outgoing Chairman Ben Bernanke after former Obama economic advisor Larry Summers withdrew his name from consideration.
So what does this mean for not only the Federal Reserve, but also the U.S. economy and the markets? Money News contributor David Nelson joins us now from New York with investment strategist Michael Gayed's take. David?
Obviously, there are 2 big stories for the markets this week. First, of course, the Fed did not taper in September as the markets had expected. But the other, perhaps biggest story is Larry Summers withdrew his name from consideration as the next Fed chair. And when I talked with Michael Gayed in my interview this week, and by the way, Michael is one of the best at reading market tea leaves and knowing what's about to happen next. He said Larry Summers withdrawing his name, that could be a very bullish signal for the markets, because most market participants understood that Larry would likely withdraw quantitative easing much faster than most of the others. And he thinks that in his trade, investors should start focusing on emerging markets. That's the high beta trade. He thinks markets are going a lot higher.
Summers was somewhat of a controversial nominee pick purely because of his prior statements about women, which had gotten him into some hot water a few years back, and this reputation that Summers had as somewhat of a bully when it comes to meetings, that he would effectively be almost like a dictator if he were in the Federal Reserve. And, you know, it's kind of a curious spot now that Obama's in, because he had passed up Yellen, which a lot of economists and Democrats have been favoring, given her direct QE experience. And now, what does it say when she's kind of the default option? It's a very awkward position, I think, for the administration. And you know, I think with Summers out, it presents interesting opportunities for what happens going forward in terms of asset class movement, in terms of the dollar, in terms of U.S. stocks, and obviously the bond market.
You know, today government is run really by polls and focus groups. And I think simply that the president saw the polls on Larry, realized he didn't have a lot of support on the Hill, and probably went to Larry Summers and asked him to withdraw his name. It's probably as simple as that.
David, with Larry's name off the list, is it a lock that Janet Yellen will be the next Fed chair?
Janet Yellen probably is a lock for the next Fed chair. Don Cohn, who's also in consideration, he's the former vice chair of the Fed, but don't rule out the long shot. And I think the long shot is actually Ben Bernanke. I realize the president has said that Ben has stayed long beyond his time, but he could surprise everybody. We've had a lot of surprises this week. Why not that? He could go up to Ben and say, look, I need you, your country needs you. That's a pretty powerful incentive.
David Nelson in New York, thank you.
Well, also in Money News, gas prices hit a record this week, 1,000 days above $3 a gallon for regular unleaded. But one expert says they could go as high as $8 a gallon. In an exclusive interview with Money News, Jeff Siegel, managing editor of Energy and Capital, says it's very possible due to an increase of market demand in foreign nations.
We do have a wealth of domestic oil and gas now, but remember that oil is a global market, and the increase in demand in China and India and other parts of the world has an effect on what happens here as well. Yes, we do have a wealth of oil and gas here, but we're also exporting a lot more now too, and we're going to send it where the price is right. So yeah, $8 a gallon is not out of the question at all.
Siegel also told us that any increase in activity in Syria from Iran or terrorist organizations could contribute to skyrocketing gas prices as well.
And coming up, millions of Americans suffer from chronic pain, and perhaps you're among them.
Up next, Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum joins us with pain-fighting prescription that does not involve any prescription drugs. His advice for pain-free life coming up.
And welcome back. If you're one of the many Americans who relies on painkillers for chronic pain, it does not have to be that way.
Yeah, according to Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum, the director of the Annapolis Center for Effective Fibromyalgia Therapies, painkillers for chronic pain can be dangerous and have a negative impact on your overall health.
You have over 30,000 Americans dying unnecessarily each year from arthritis medications, things like ibuprofen, those similar. You'll have 16,500 bleeding ulcer deaths a year, and a doubling to tripling of heart attack and stroke risks. Also, very often they just don't work. So it's okay once in a while to take them. I mean, it's a lot safer to take the medication than it is to be in pain. But natural options and treating the cause of the pain works far, far, far more effectively.
And as substitute for harmful painkillers, Dr. Teitelbaum suggests incorporating pain-killing foods into your diet whenever possible.
The fun thing is that if you have ginger, kind of like the pickled ginger that you'll see in Japanese restaurants, or you can just take 1/3 of an inch of ginger root and chop it up, pour hot water over it to make a tea. It's quite effective for pain. In addition, Indian food, curries, which have turmeric or curcumin, also can be very helpful for pain. And one of my favorites is beer. Beer has hops, which is a very, very effective muscle relaxant. On the other hand, other foods are not so good for you, such as increasing sugar. Sugar can throw your muscles into spasm by causing drops in blood sugar. But I'll give you one other tip for those with migraines. If you're having a migraine, normally if you take things like the ibuprofen or the Tylenol, those things won't work because your stomach has been turned off from the migraine. But if you drink a strong cup of coffee with it, the caffeine will wake your stomach back up and make those more effective again. That's why Excedrin migraine can be so helpful for a migraine headache.
Doctors also say these practices can be more effective than painkillers because they treat the source of the pain, not just the symptoms. And here's a look at what's coming up next week on Newsmax Exclusive.
Best-selling author and investigative reporter Dr. Jerome Corsi unveils new revelations about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in his new book, Who Really Killed Kennedy. Dr. Corsi will explain why he believes the CIA knew more about the murder than many realize, and why he believes the Warren Commission covered it up.
Plus, Kathleen Walter will be in New York covering the annual meeting of the Clinton Global Initiative. We'll take a look at how the president is using his position to give back, and we'll have complete coverage from there. That's all next week on Newsmax Exclusive. That'll be a good trip for you. Look forward to seeing what you get there.
I'm looking forward to it as well, John.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Newsmax Exclusive.
Be sure to stay with Newsmax.com for the latest in news, politics, and finance. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Take care.